Let's discuss now with CNN's Josh Campbell, who was an FBI supervisory agent, and former House Intelligence Chairman Mike Rogers, who was also a special agent in the FBI. Gentlemen, it's great to have your vast expertise that we can call upon, as well as your own intelligence and institutional memory. The very things that President Trump doesn't seem to want to use. Congressman Rogers, what does President Trump have against intelligence?
Well, I think this is all about narrative for the president. It doesn't fit his narrative, and he's got a legal case where people are accusing him publicly of collusion, accusing him of obstruction of justice. And I think to the president, all of this conflates together. Even if the intelligence community walks in and says, Mr. President, here's the evidence that we have that the Russians attempted to influence U.S. elections. Republicans, Democrats agree. The intelligence community on a wholesale value agrees that that's happening. I will tell you it's still happening. And I think that the president cannot separate the fact that he doesn't believe there's collusion. And candidly, I don't think he'll ever be charged with collusion. But he can't get over the fact that if the Russians did that, that he won for president. And so anything that comes out of those organizations just can't be right, and he won't believe it. That's what's troubling about this.
Okay. So, Josh, the president is personally affronted by this, as I think that all of the sourcing and reporting has shown and proven. So what's lost? Okay, these weren't, I mean, James Clapper, John Brennan, these weren't people that the White House was calling upon for their institutional knowledge. As you know, General Michael Hayden, I mean, as impressive as these men have been, they've served in different administrations, not just for Democrats, but they weren't being called upon by the White House. So if he revokes their security clearances, what's lost?
So I would agree that this is one gigantic distraction, and that's been a narrative that we've heard since this came out yesterday, that they're just attempting to now, gaslight and distract from something else. The problem for them is that we can all walk and chew gum. So we're going to get back to Russia. We're going to get back to Cohen. Those issues aren't going away. But the issue here that we see, and I would agree with you that the top level officials probably aren't reaching out to these farmers to get their advice, but that doesn't mean that the men and women in the intelligence community can't use them as a resource. And I think the big loser here is the intelligence community, is American national security. Because if you think about these CIA directors and DNI directors that are former and had access to this information, that had programs that were run under their purview, this is a wealth of information. These people have decades and decades of institutional knowledge. And if you're an analyst sitting at NSA or CIA and you're working on a program that may be informed by something that a former director did, basically the White House is now saying that that's off limits. Hurts national security. And I'll just say, Allison, what I think is that it's a fundamental misunderstanding of the security clearance process. They cannot distinguish between misusing classified information, which no one's been accused of, and criticism. If you look at the Rob Porter scandal, if you look at Jared Kushner and his issues with security clearances, it kind of shows that continued narrative. And I would say, and I would submit, that this is a case of ultimate projection by paranoid politicians. They probably wonder what they would do if they were in the situation where they had access to secrets and dirt on someone that can use it, but they don't understand how civil servants work. Civil servants know that when you sign up, when you take an oath, you protect that information.
All of that said, Congressman Rogers, I was stunned to hear the numbers. I mean, according to the Office of the DNI, 4.1 million Americans at the moment hold a security clearance. 1.3 million of them have a top secret clearance. You, I think, are one of the people who still has your security clearance. I mean, do we need that many? That's amazing that many people are walking around with access to, it sounds like, to, highly sensitive intelligence.
Well, and there's varying degrees, as you just talked about. So there is top secret, then there's compartmentalized information, and that group continues to get smaller. So that really sensitive information that can get people in trouble on sources and methods gets necked down. If you think about it, every FBI agent starts out with a secret clearance, and they'll get sometimes top secret or above, depending on the work that they're doing in the Bureau. And that goes across every investigative agency in the federal government, all the people in intelligence. So there are quite a few people that are doing it. And one of the things that does is it allows the government to safeguard pieces of information from getting both out in the public and to our adversaries. So, it's a process and reminds people, this is why I like the clearance process, it reminds them you have an obligation. And by the way, it will be criminal if you disclose this information unauthorized for the protection of the information of the U.S. government. So, yes, there's a lot of them, but yes, there's lots of work that goes across the government that you need to at least safeguard to some degree. And I think that's probably wholly appropriate. I think we are going to relook, the government, I should say, is going to relook at the security clearance process, how you get one, how you maintain one. All of that is really important, I think, to the future protection of information that needs to be kept, again, away from adversaries and sometimes the press. The government does need to do activities that the press is not aware of.
Yes, I am aware of that, though it can be frustrating to the press. But, Josh, I think the big overarching question is, what happens when the intelligence community today gets some sort of information about an impending terror attack? I mean, worst case scenario, they get information. Will President Trump believe them? Will he trust them?
So that's the problem. If you go back to Russia when the president was sitting there next to Vladimir Putin in Helsinki and essentially undercutting the U.S. intelligence community and saying that, my people are saying one thing, this guy says something else, essentially equalizing these two views. What he's essentially doing is undercutting the credibility of the U.S. intelligence community, not only on the world stage. So when you have an FBI agent that's overseas, a CIA station chief who's now approaching a foreign counterpart and trying to convince them of something, it's going to be a lot harder. They might say, well, aha, your president says that you guys don't know what you're talking about. But the issue that you talk about is the fundamental issue. If the president cannot be approached with information that he may disagree with and he may disbelieve, then that makes it a lot difficult for the intelligence community to actually convince him of anything. If he can pick and choose and say, well, I agree with this, I disagree with this based on how it impacts me personally, again, the whole system breaks down. And to your point, the most serious issue would be something involving terrorism, something involving national security, maybe some type of nuclear issue. But if the intelligence community knows going in that the president doesn't believe them, essentially, unless there's some kind of political benefit to him, it makes it a lot harder to do their job, to convince him that they need to be trusted.
Does that worry you, Congressman?
Well, yeah, of course. And any time that the president stands on a world stage with a very aggressive intelligence service adversary's president and says, guess what, the U.S. intelligence community isn't right, and maybe the problems with Russia is the United States' fault, in the FBI we would call that a clue. I mean, that's a problem, and it's a significant problem because one of the things you do is you feed the information operation campaign that Vladimir Putin has put together that not only targets the United States, targets other European countries, and that the information coming right out of the president's mouth will be used against us, I guarantee you, and it's being used against us today. And that's where I think the president misses the boat about how dangerous an adversary in the intelligence business Vladimir Putin and his folks are.
Mike Rogers, Josh Campbell, thank you.